Welcome to the Grounded podcast with your host, Dr. Iman. This is a space where the intellectual meets the spiritual. I'm a professor, scholar of religion, and someone trying to find her footing. Together, we'll seek clarity not in passivity or bypassing, but in intuition, critique, and imagination. Some episodes are just me, reflecting on where I'm finding my footing. Others draw more closely from my own research on religion and spirituality, tracing where I've seen others find theirs. And sometimes we're joined by experts, friends, and even you, listeners, learning with each other and seeking rootedness together. So wherever this episode takes us, I'm really glad you're here. Let's get grounded. Hello, everyone. It is your host, Iman, and today I'm feeling particularly grounded in the fact that I'm finally getting down my Baddie routine. As you all know, I moved to Atlanta in January, and with moving to a new space also comes with getting to know yourself in that space and your new routines. I started a new job. I'm just in a totally new place in life, and I feel like I finally have come to a bit of a cadence and a rhythm in what works for me during the work week. And I've realized that if I treat Wednesdays how I used to treat Maria Sundays, then I just feel so much better throughout the week. In all honesty, I do work on the weekends, and I actually start my work week on Sundays, which has gotten in the way of ever since I was a little girl. My mother's name is Maria. We would always spend Sundays resetting and rebooting and also resetting our bodies in a very ritualistic way, I would describe. We would always do our nails on Sundays. She would do our hair on Sundays. We would, what do the girls call it now? Oh my God, the girls have a name for, we would do everything showers. Sunday would just always be kind of a reset day, and not just energetically, but also kind of ritualistically in terms of our body and our self-care. But I have found with just the work week and my schedule, if I treat Wednesdays as my Sundays, because I work on Sundays and sometimes Saturdays, but whatever, I'm working on work-life balance, that I just feel so much better in my week. So I finally have found my grocery store where I like to get my nails done, the mode of transportation, and how I like to get to those places. And so I just did all of those small things today. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my nails. Feeling very happy about those. I'm also sweating a little bit because it's 85 degrees in Atlanta, and I cannot turn on the air conditioner and record at the same time because the background noise picks up. So we're just a little sweaty, and that's okay. But I am just feeling very grounded in my body. I am also feeling very grounded that my sister called me and she said, I'm noticing you're missing something in your makeup routine, which is having a larger contrast between your eyelids and your under eye. Because when I was homeless, I went to Ulta with my sister and she helped me just totally revamp my makeup for how the girls have doing it. In 2016, I spent so much time watching YouTube makeup tutorials, and I have used those skills every day of my life since then. But the girls are not doing their makeup in 2026 as they were in 2016. And I have a twin sister who has always just been my high femme guide in life. And she helped me pick out new makeup, told me what I needed to do. And the other day when she saw my first video, she was like, girl, you need to start doing something more contrast with your eyelids. And I think I'm slowly getting it. So I'm just feeling very grounded in my body, grounded in my place, grounded in the sense of self that I am developing in my new home in Atlanta and just the city in this new phase in life. So we are feeling good today. And that is actually a perfect segue into our organizing question of the day, which is, what is divine about the Black femme? We're in a moment right now where there's so much talk about the divine feminine in pop culture and social media, both in this kind of like trad wife, gender war, manosphere sense, but also in spiritual talk and witch talk and all these different elements. And even outside of that, beauty talk. I saw Kendall Jenner talking about the divine feminine or divine goddess in an interview. So we're just in a pop culture social media moment where there's so much discussion of the divine femme. So today I want us to think about what is exactly divine about the femme. In particular, as you all know, I am a scholar of Black women's religious history and an intellectual historian. So I'm always going to be answering those kinds of questions through the lens of my expertise in that area of study. So today I want to turn to an amazing article by Lorde Coleman Taylor called Religio-erotic Experience in Trans Becoming at the Shoreline and Audre Lorde Zami. Now, this is a really theoretically dense academic article that is Lorde Coleman Taylor's deep dive and analysis of how Audre Lorde writes about the Black femme as divine, particularly in her kind of fictional memoir, that of Zami. But today I want to kind of engage more so Ashley Coleman Taylor's analysis at a higher, more general level, which I'm honestly excited about doing because this is the next area of research or area of topic that I want to go into for my next journal articles. I told myself I would use this podcast as somewhat of a reading note and trying to get my own thoughts on the page of how I'm thinking about these terms that I'm encountering in scholarship. And I also have to say, I taught this article in my intro to religion class, and it went over so well with the students. Even though it was a graduate level article, we were able to pull out particular moments and theories in the text to have a really interesting conversation around the Black femme, religion, spirituality, and the divine. And so I'm excited to bring a little bit of that here and also my own thinking, because when I'm teaching in class, I do my best and always try to facilitate the relationship between the text and students. And I am just excited to use this space to facilitate my own kind of thinking around both the text and myself. So to get started, who is the Black femme? Now, the term Black femme or femme is a term that comes out of lesbian culture. And Ashley Coleman Taylor in this piece, through this amazing literature review, talks about who the Black femme is as she's been written about in academic scholarship. And what it boils down to is the idea that the Black femme is not synonymous with the Black woman or the female. And this is really important. Rather than thinking about the Black femme as specifically in the sense of female or the sense of woman, Black femme becomes a term that is expansive, that is queer, that does not abide by the gender binary, that is inclusive of Black trans being and people. It is a form of gender creativity that does not abide by the gender binary or white supremacy. And of course, the gender binary is propped up through white supremacy. And so I think understanding the Black femme as not just equated to Black womanhood or the Black woman, or even people with birthing and reproductive capabilities, is a really important intervention into how the divine feminine is talked about on social media, which is frequently to kind of reinforce the idea that femininity exists exclusively to those who identify as women. Whereas Ashley Coleman Taylor, Audre Lorde, queer theory, Black queer theory wants us to understand the term femme as going beyond just a binary understanding of womanhood. And this is where I think it's important to draw a line between what Black queer folks mean when they say Black femme and what other folks mean when they evoke the divine femme and the divine feminine. Because people who are talking about the divine feminine are not necessarily talking about the divine femme. People who are talking about the Black feminine are not necessarily talking about the Black femme. So frequently, people who are talking about those things as exclusively the domain of women are not talking about the Black femme in the sense that Ashley Coleman Taylor is theorizing, in the way that gender and queer theory and scholarship is theorizing. And I frequently see this distinction play out in spaces where folks are talking about the divine feminine as it relates to Black women's experiences. And frequently what they will do is they will talk about the feminine and it being divine, relating it back to African diasporic cultural, spiritual, and religious practices. But they will then, in that same kind of conversation, say how their own propping up of Black women's sexuality, sensuality, and sensibilities is different and is an exact juxtaposition to the kind of Black femininity, Black womanhood, and Black sensuality that is depicted in popular culture through women in hip hop, like a Sexy Red, like a Cardi B, like a Megan Thee Stallion. And this is a kind of rhetorical move that frustrates me deeply, and why it's important to distinguish between folks who are talking about the divine feminine versus how Ashley Coleman Taylor and folks in Black studies and queer theory are talking about the femme. Because in this kind of divine feminine conversation, yes, Black women's sexuality, sensualities, and sensibilities, also a longer history of that predates slavery, is important. But the moment that gets defined over and against another depiction of Black femininity, then red flags in my ears start to go up. What I think is really misunderstood about the rap girlies, about their expression of a Black femme sensibility, a Black femininity, is that folks who are talking about the divine feminine often distinguish what they're doing in terms of discussions of Black women's sexuality and sensuality as being for women, by women, a display in conversations around intimacy, sex, embodiment, and sensuality that is outside of the male gaze. It is a for women, by women space. And what I find so interesting is that when they then bring up a Meg, a Cardi, a Sexy Red as a foil to what they are doing, they often miss, I think, an extremely important part that when you go to a Meg concert, a Cardi concert, when you look out into those audiences, those are Black women in those audiences. And I think that this is what distinguishes the rap girlies from the men in the game. Because if you go to a 21 Savage and A$AP Rocky concert, you are going to be shocked, or maybe like I have been shocked, but I guess I shouldn't be shocked, that the majority of people in those audiences are white men. But when you go to one of the girls' concerts, the majority of people in those audiences are Black women, Black femmes, Black queer people. So their music, even though it is in the public sphere, and we can talk about whether or not there is even a private sphere that is also not public. But going back to the point, when you go to those spaces and to those concerts, those are also displays, conversations, discussions about Black women's sexual, intimate, physical, embodied, and everyday experiences that are by Black women, by Black femmes, not just women, for other Black femmes. But often folks who are exclusively talking about the divine feminine as it relates to Black womanhood through a binary understanding often critique the other side as being a display of Black sexuality and Black embodiment for the male gaze. When in reality, you go to the rap girlies concerts, you go into those spaces, there's not a male gaze. The men are not there. There is no male gaze in the room. And I'm kind of just giggling thinking about this because I just find it extremely ironic that folks who are interested in talking about the divine feminine to reify a particular kind of gender binary use this, oh, you are doing this for the male gaze critique for a Black femininity that is seen as unruly. When in reality, the rap girlies are a femme for femme space, are a woman for woman space. So anyways, that is just an example of how when you see folks start talking about the divine feminine in a way that is defined over and against a Nicki, a Cardi, somebody who is seen as sexually perverse, that is defined over and against expressions of Black femme outside of the gender binary and cis women, that is exclusionary to trans women, that is not the divine Black femme that Ashley Coleman Taylor and Audre Lorde are talking about. So I just offer that as an example that in a moment when we are being saturated with social media discourse about the divine feminine that reifies the gender binary, there's so much work and scholarship, not just contemporary, that has been happening for decades by Black women in the United States that have understood what is divine about femininity beyond white supremacy, the gender binary, and transphobia. So now that we've drawn the distinction, another really important aspect of how Ashley Coleman Taylor is theorizing, as well as Audre Lorde, is the idea that the Black femme is an expression of gender creativity and one in which embodiment, dress, aesthetics, and self-representation are crucial. They are things that are tended to, cultivated, and are tools of survival. I think of that even for myself, the way that I do my hair, the way that I put on my makeup, the way that I get my nails done, the way that I myself present as a Black queer woman has absolutely nothing to do with the male gaze, has absolutely nothing to do with white beauty standards. It has everything to do about my own self-representation, my own sense of things, and my own articulation of who I am in relation to femme gaze, in relation to a gaze that has nothing to do with white supremacy or men, even though that does not stop the gaze, obviously. So now that we know who the Black femme is, what exactly makes the Black femme divine? And Ashley Coleman Taylor provides a really layered, like I said, really theoretically rich and theoretically dense answer to this question. But I just want to pull out 2 points that I think are really important to think with. And the first answer to that question of what makes the Black femme divine is a relentless commitment to her own becoming according to her own sense of things. Not the male gaze, not compulsive heterosexuality, not gender norms and gender binaries, not white supremacy and white beauty standards, according to her own sense of things. Now, of course, it's never not in negotiation and informed, but is a relentless pursuit and a movement to try to become and be outside of those grammars.
And when I heard this, I thought, oh my God, this actually explains so much of why I am drawn to particular kind of creators and influencers in my own social media consumption. I feel like I have a particular kind of like nose for just authenticity and a particular kind of disgust and disdain for what I feel like is just the rampant hyper consumerism and capitalism that gets thrusted into femme culture. This world just every day tries to convince the femme that they need to buy more things in order to be who they are rather than actually develop their own sense of things. Again, another episode for another day, but this made me think about, wow, this really provides the language for me for thinking about why I love particular creators. And my favorite Black femme creator right now is Jules LeBron. I just love her. That is the girl who coined very mindful, very demure. I have just been following her on social media, and what I love is that she has recently made a huge switch from very mindful, very demure to talking about how blowing up and going viral in that way led her to addiction, led her to the lowest moments in her life. And I've just always felt in all of her videos, there is an authenticity there. There is a sense of self there that is, according to her own terms, a sense of self that is vulnerable, a sense of self that is extremely transparent about who she is and what she is going through, which to me, when I watch her, I feel like I am having a spiritual experience because I am watching her. I am watching these videos and I am seeing someone who is committed and relentlessly committed to becoming on her own terms. Even when those terms haven't served her the best, she's honest about that. But she's so honest about her own transformation and becoming. It's something that I really admire and I just love to witness. And I need to start populating my media, I think, with more Black femmes who I think display that same kind of level of authenticity. Actually, you know who is another one? The comedian Don't Call Me White Girl, Mona. Another person who is so honest, so transparent, so vulnerable in the way that she talks about her own sense of the world. And she's a comedian too. But I look at these two Black femmes, Jules LeBron, Mona from Don't Call Me White Girl, and what draws me to their content, what draws me to their beauty content, their lifestyle content when it comes to Jules LeBron, what draws me to Mona's content when it comes to comedy, when it comes to her podcast, is that there is just a relentless commitment to becoming on their own terms that I want to embody. I learn from them by watching them be who they are and be who they are transparently in front of a camera, in front of the public. They are providing an important community service to the girls. There is so much potentiality in this idea of what makes the femme divine is her own relentless sense of self and becoming on her own terms, as opening up a third question to the idea of kind of religion and queerness and spirituality that gets talked about. I have seen people try to justify or try to legitimate being Muslim and gay, being Muslim and lesbian, being Muslim and queer, being Black and queer, being Black and lesbian, through two particular strategies. And what I think Audre Lorde and Ashley Coleman Taylor's lifting up of Audre Lorde's understanding of the relationship between the Black femme and the divine and queerness and spirituality is that I think it opens up a third option. So the two options that I see most frequently is folks will either go specifically to the Quran, to the Hadith, to certain scripture, and they will talk about how nowhere in these scriptures that are considered the most authoritative source of religion does it state that being gay, being queer, or what have you is actually explicitly condemned. And of course, there's interpretive debates on whether or not that interpretation fits onto the text. But that is one, going to scripture and saying that there's actually nothing in the Quran that says that it is haram, it is forbidden to be gay, to be queer, to be lesbian, what have you. Now, the second thing that people will do, and I often find that this is also a mode of justification, even outside of the Muslim community, but just in Black communities in general, is that they will go to pre-modern sources, histories, and legal documents, and all of these things to prove that gender expression beyond the gender binary, beyond the idea that there's only two genders, existed, was talked about in pre-modern, pre-colonial contexts. And this has been an important justification of Black queerness and Muslim queerness because it challenges the discussion that queer is a colonial or a white import or white thing. So these are the two dominant strategies that I find that folks, Muslim folks, Black and Muslim folks turn to in order to justify being Black and gay, being Black and queer, being Black and lesbian. And what I love about the Ashley Coleman piece in her reading of Audre Lorde is that I think it opens up a third option, right? Ashley Coleman Taylor is saying that Audre Lorde says that what is divine about the femme is her own relentless commitment to her own becoming according to her own sense of things. Remember in the first episode, I told you that I kind of had this like life-changing psychic reading where I confessed to someone who I admire deeply that like there was something that always felt kind of selfish or self-indulgent about spirituality. And she told me the most spiritual thing you can do is develop a relationship with yourself. Now fast forward and see how Ashley Coleman and Audre Lorde are also saying that same thing, that the most spiritual thing that you can do is develop a relationship to yourself, to be committed to your own becoming through your own sense of things. And so what about that as just a third option? What about the idea that you don't have to go to a pre-modern source, you don't have to go to scripture, that you do not actually need to justify through anything outside of yourself that who you are is not something to be managed, erased, or something that needs to be condemned? What if you just relied on your own sense of things? Your own sense for what you feel for that woman, your own sense for what you feel for that person is so magnificent. How could it be something other than divine? How could it not be a little piece of the divine on this earth? So what about that? When people ask me, oh my gosh, what is it like to be Muslim? What is it like to be queer? What is it like to be a Muslim lesbian? How do you talk to people who feel like that to say that you are a Black Muslim lesbian produces a kind of contradiction? And to that I say, well, I can tell you two ways that people have historically tried to justify that. But what I'm going to tell you is that needs no justification on my part because I just know. My inner voice, my intuition, my own sense of things is strong enough for myself. I don't need anything else to justify who I am. I don't need anything else to justify my existence. So again, talking to my Black gays, my Muslim gays, I'm talking to you, okay? There's a third option. You don't need to pull out no book to justify who you are, okay? Even though I am pulling out a book and a whole article by Ashley Coleman Taylor and Audre Lorde to tell you that you can actually, I think, just rely on your own sense of things if you want to embody the divine femme as Ashley Coleman Taylor and as Audre Lorde write about it. And let's be very clear, they're writing about the divine femme. They are writing about a commitment to a Black sense of things and a Black sense of self as being an Afro-diasporic epistemology or mode of knowing. When you actually start being committed to your own becoming, to your own sense of things, that you are actually embracing an ancestral African diasporic understanding of things. That's their claim. That's what they want us to see. And I think that that's a really powerful way to think about Blackness and queerness together, especially as it relates to religion and spirituality. Another answer that Ashley Coleman Taylor provides to what is divine about the Black femme is more of a question of where and how does she encounter the divine, right? She talks about the kind of crossroads of what makes something a religious and a spiritual encounter as being a space in which, right, the immaterial, the unseen comes to interact and at a crossroads with the material and the seen. That it is at those crossroads where the divine happens and takes place. And so Ashley Coleman Taylor talks about how a space in which that interaction between the spiritual and the material, the metaphysical and the material, the unseen and the seen happens, does not just happen in spaces that are authorized, like the church, like the mosque, but also happens at the site of the body. It happens at the site of the body and through the body's own encounters with other bodies. That we encounter the divine by encountering ourselves through encounters with other people and how they see us. And so she talks about how in Zami, it is the dance floor when Audre Lorde is dancing with her Black femme love interest. That becomes a space of divine and spiritual encounter. And this is really important to understandings of Black becoming and Black queer becoming, especially when Black queer becoming is not something that is facilitated frequently, appropriately, often in the safest ways in spaces that are authorized and recognizable as religious. There's a lot of work to be done in those spaces. In this figuration, the Black femme encounters divinity. One encounters the divinity of the Black femme on the dance floor, at the hangout, in the kitchen, in an Ulta, in a Sephora, in the garden, at a game night, at a reading circle, at the bookstore, in a classroom. all of these spaces in which the body is sensing, is picking up things. The body is a technology for this kind of divine encounter. Both encounters with spaces, but also with people. I also spent the day cleaning my house today because I'm so excited because my sister and my cousin are coming to visit me in Atlanta this weekend. And I am just like, my inner child is just beaming, like thinking, oh my God, we like grew up together, teenage together. We were just little girls together. And we would always talk about, oh my God, what is life going to be like when I'm 20? What is life going to be like when I'm 30? And I just like feel so happy and so grateful that I get to like host them in my apartment that I live in by myself in Atlanta. And we're going to explore a new city and have a great time. And I'm just beaming. And to me, like I'm already preparing, like I feel like I'm preparing my home for like a big spiritual religious ceremony that is about to happen through my encounter with my sister, with my cousin. Knowing the fun we are going to have in the sun, on the dance floor, hanging out, watching movies. You cannot tell me that that is not spiritual and that is not religious. And as a matter of fact, it is, right? That is what Ashley Coleman Taylor and Audre Lorde invite us to consider. They also invite us to consider the erotic encounter. The erotic not just being intercourse, but the erotic being one's sensuality and sensibilities about things as spiritual encounters. As Audre Lorde puts it, right? She experiences the erotic when she is laying in the sun with her lover, when she's putting together a bookshelf, when she encounters herself through others. And what's really important about this understanding and what Ashley Coleman Taylor also brings up is this idea of that Audre Lorde and the Black Femme divine sense of self is not just a sense of self that is rooted in individualism. It is a sense of self that is simultaneously rooted in both individualism and a collectivism. It's the classic saying, how do I know the I if I don't know the you? And when you think about it, it's a kind of argument that says you cannot become alone. You cannot become in isolation, which is really vulnerable work. It's really vulnerable to make new friends. It's really vulnerable to put yourself out there and date. It's really vulnerable to be who you are to your family and friends. It's really vulnerable to be out, to be Muslim, to be queer, to be lesbian, and claim all those identities without contradiction. I feel lots of vulnerability around that all the time, but I do it because I am committed to my own becoming according to my own sense of things. And that's how I try to embody my own divine femme. It is that relentless commitment to determining one's life according to one's own sense of things that draws me into Black women's religious history, that draws me into Black women's intellectual history. I am obsessed. I'm obsessed with seeing the kind of tools, the modes of knowing, the technologies that Black women have used within these borders to become themselves on their own sense of terms when there are so many other voices and systems of power telling them otherwise or to become in a certain way. So with that, as always, I'm leaving this episode a little bit tired, which I hope is a sign that some good channeling came through. But I am leaving this episode feeling very grounded, that I am also trying to make this space one in which I hold myself accountable to my own relentless sense of becoming as an intellectual, as a scholar, becoming as a person, as a Black femme, as a Muslim, as a queer, and the vulnerability that that is really taking from me. So with that, I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode, and you can catch new ones every Monday, wherever you listen to podcasts, and we should have a YouTube. You can follow me on social media and at YouTube. My handles are IMANABDK. And please share this episode with a friend. Follow us on YouTube, subscribe, comment, like and review. What also, again, helps the most is sharing it with people who you think might enjoy this conversation and thinking at the intersections of the spiritual and the intellectual. So I will see you guys all here next Monday. And I hope between now and then, you are also just being relentless in your own commitment to becoming. Bye-bye.